All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right? I just make sure the sound levels are good. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Serra. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey State League of Municipalities. This is our free briefing on the American Rescue Plan. Also on the call is our Assistant Executive Director, Lori Buckaloo, and leading the presentation will be our legislative analyst, who's really been our point person on this, Paul Penna. Let me just say from the outset, the American Rescue Plan was a first in many, many ways, not the least of which it was the first time Congress has actually allocated funding directly to every municipality, all 19,000 in the country, as well as every county and every state in the nation. This is the first. It might not be a last. And if it's a good model going forward, we need to get it right. So I think the state leagues throughout the country and the National League of Cities are doing these briefings to inform our members. And this is not the first briefing that we've done on this topic, and it probably will not be the last. And it certainly will be addressed at the league conference in November, which we have every expectation will be held in person. Before we begin, and I hand the baton to Paul, let me do a few housekeeping items. First, this is a Zoom meeting. We're not running it as a webinar per se. I would ask if you all could keep yourself on mute for the time being during the presentation. You can put questions in the chat box, and we certainly can open it up at the end. This is being recorded, and it will be posted on the league website by Monday, so you can review it at that point. You also get a copy of the slide deck, which will be the presentation. We will be monitoring the chat box for questions. Any questions we cannot answer today, we're going to be keeping a list on, and we'll try to answer in either further briefings or in a frequently asked question document. And during the presentation, we'll also be dropping some links into the chat box. So thank you all for taking your time to join us today. We have a great audience, and hopefully this will be an informative session. If you all bear with me for one moment, I am going to share my screen. And Paul, if you'd like to take it from here.
Great, thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to those of you that participated in our previous ARP guidance webinars after the passage of the American Rescue Plan this past March. So the reason for this webinar is that the United States Treasury has issued an interim final rule, all 151 pages of it, to outline the guidance on how municipalities, counties, and states can utilize the American Rescue Plan funds that will be made available to them. Mike, if you want to go ahead and go to the first slide.
Working on it. It's been a little.
And while Mike does figure that out, let me just say that, the information that we're providing today is our best guidance based on our reading of the interim final rule, the frequently asked questions and information that's been provided by the U.S. Treasury, and the information from our partners at the National League of Cities. The information that we're going to discuss today is complete up to this moment, but there are still many unknowns. And as they become known, as Mike said, we will go ahead and share that information with you. So New Jersey is going to receive an estimated $10.2 billion, 1.74 billion split among the 565 municipalities, 1.82 billion combined for the 21 counties, and approximately 6.4 billion for the state. And those of you that have seen the press this morning or watched yesterday's Senate Budget Committee are aware that the state's money is in hand. And I have heard from some entitlement communities that have already made their application that their money has been deposited as well. Before we go to the next slide, the one thing I would like to preach is patience. We'll discuss the existing timelines for usage of this money, but everyone should be clear that they have until the end of calendar year 2024 to utilize all of these funds. And if you choose to utilize these funds for infrastructure projects, allowed infrastructure projects, you actually, as long as it's obligated, it will be, you have until the end of 2026. So Mike, next slide, please. The funds will be distributed in two tranches. 50% will be coming this year and 50% will be coming next year. And as I discussed, units of government have until the end of 2024 to obligate the money for allowed infrastructure projects and complete them by 2026. Other spending, usage for revenue loss, premium pay, other help to residents and businesses must be complete by December 2024. Next slide, please, Mike. So for purposes of our discussion, the 565 municipalities in New Jersey have been divided into two groups per the United States Treasury. Metropolitan cities, which are largely municipalities that have a population over 50,000, although not exclusively, and for there are about 47 or so of those communities, and then non-entitlement units, which are the remaining 515 or so municipalities in New Jersey. So for receiving funds, metropolitan cities, as most of you know, the application portal is open. Regardless of past federal funding, every municipality will need to apply. And the items needed to apply include a data universal numbering system number, DUNS number, and an active registration with the System and Awards Management database at sam.gov. Municipalities will also have to have their entity identification number, name and title of authorized representative of each municipality and the financial institution to wire the money. Next slide, please, Mike. For non-entitlement units, municipalities with a population under 50,000, the U.S. Treasury will allocate and pay the funds to the state government, and the state will distribute the funds to non-entitlement units of local government in proportion to population. Non-entitlement units will have to also have a DUNS number, banking information, and will have to meet the reporting requirements that we'll discuss shortly under this program. Because this money will come through the state, we also expect that there will be additional state requirements, and we've been in touch with the Murphy administration and expect further guidance shortly from the Division of Local Government Services. Next slide, please, Mike. So the U.S. Treasury interim final rule states that the state, meaning New Jersey, may not impose stricter limitations than permitted by statute or U.S. Treasury regulations or guidance on a municipality's use of fiscal recovery funds based on their proposed spending plans or other policies. So therefore, states and territories are not permitted to offset any debt that a municipality may owe to the state, and the state may not provide funding on a reimbursement basis. For example, requiring municipalities to pay for project costs up front before being reimbursed with fiscal recovery funds, because the funding model will not comport to the statutory requirement that states and territories make to municipalities. So for example, if municipality X is entitled to get $100, but their population is less than $50,000. U.S. Treasury is going to deliver the amount for all non-entitlement units to the state, and the state has 30 days. They do have the ability to ask for an extension from the U.S. Treasury, but within 30 days, they're expected to turn around the $100 to the municipality, provided that the municipality has provided the DUNS number and the other requisite information that's needed. This funding is different than most municipalities, counties, and states have experienced because they are not contingent on a grant application. They are not contingent on a large federal process. The American Rescue Plan says there is money allotted for municipalities, counties, and states. There are certain amounts for each, and each are to get that money in 2 tranches, half now, half next year, and you have a few years to spend it. There are obviously rules that you'll have to follow that we'll go through, and the expectation is that you will follow through with those rules, but it's really permissive as opposed to we have met the requirements and therefore go ahead and grant us the money. Mike, next slide, please. So the framework to assess eligibility for projects and services are: 1, identify the harmful effects of COVID-19 the activity will address, assess the causal or compounding connection to COVID-19, assess for disproportionate impact on distressed sectors or populations, and lastly, determine how to prove the expenses produced the expected outcome. So there is a lot of wiggle room within this framework, and there are some specifics. Next slide, please, Mike. But there are really 4 parameters that the law lays out for the spending of these American Rescue Plan funds. Number 1, to respond to the public health emergency with respect to the coronavirus 2019 or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. Number 2, to respond to workers performing essential work during the COVID-19 public health emergency by providing premium pay to eligible workers that are performing essential work, or by providing grants to eligible employers that have eligible workers who perform essential work. So this is this is only for employees that were in person during the pandemic. This is not for employees that worked remote during the pandemic. Next slide, please, Mike. Number 3, for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue. Revenue replacement is permitted. The base year to measure lost revenue against is not the most recent full fiscal year, but the most recent full fiscal year prior to the emergency. And then lastly, to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. We're expecting further guidance from U.S. Treasury on this. There have been some notices in the frequently asked questions with regard to this, but they are continuing to build this up. I will note that other infrastructure projects outside of the water, sewer, broadband infrastructure are not permitted and not in eligible use for this. Next slide, please. So the following activities are listed below: direct cash payment and loan intervention, assistance to businesses and nonprofits, impacted industries and workers, housing and community development, homelessness, child care, and education, have a presumption of eligibility inside qualified census tracts, which is defined as an area that have 50% of households with income below 60% of the area's median gross income or has a poverty rate of 25% or more. Now, other areas in this, other municipalities will be able to utilize their funds for some of these, but because the presumption of the American Rescue Plan was to help those that were hit the hardest in the areas that have the most poverty, these activities are presumed to be eligible. So next slide, please, Mike. So the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. So for infrastructure projects eligible projects that would generally be eligible under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, including to construct, improve, and repair wastewater treatment plants, control non-point source of pollution, create green infrastructure, manage and treat stormwater, water reuse, protect water bodies from pollution, and then projects eligible under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund to build or upgrade facilities to improve water quality, transmission, distribution, and storage systems, consolidation or establishment of drinking water, and then cybersecurity, climate change and resilience, and lead service line replacement. In our review of the interim final rule, I will note that the guidance is silent on whether these funds can be used for demolition with regard to some of the infrastructure. So we are seeking further guidance on that, and we'll provide it when we have it. In terms of, on the previous webinar, we had gotten questions, could a municipality utilize some of these funds to upgrade facilities and services at the municipal building for remote work and for other services? Presumably under the cybersecurity parameters here, you would be able to utilize some of these funds to upgrade your systems as well. Next slide, please, Mike. Broadband as an eligible use. So for broadband, eligible projects must be designed to provide service to unserved and underserved households and businesses. Unserved and underserved is defined as lacking access to at least 25/3 megabits per second wireline services, and specific service areas and locations may be defined by the community. It provides service that reliably meets or exceeds symmetrical speeds of 100 megabits per second, or if possible, at least 100/20 megabits per second, with the ability to scale to 100 megabits symmetrically. Eligible projects are encouraged to consider affordability, avoid investing in locations with existing agreements to build reliable wireline service with minimum speeds by December 21st of 2024, deliver a physical broadband connection by prioritizing projects that achieve last mile connections, and prioritize municipal, nonprofit, and cooperative owned networks. Digital inclusion, assistance to households, including internet access and digital literacy assistance, are eligible uses. Treasury is mindful that there are areas of this country that have internet providers, and while they may not be reliable, municipalities, if they choose to, should utilize their funds to help upgrade their systems and provide internet services. They should not utilize funds to create their own internet system where there is already an existing internet service, regardless of its reliability. Next slide, please, Mike. So eligible uses, lost revenue. I suspect this is where most of everyone on this call is most interested. So for the provisions of the government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue for local governments due to the COVID-19 public health emergency relative to revenues collected in the most recent fiscal year, full fiscal year, general revenue draws on the census definition of general revenue of own sources, and recipients should sum across all revenue streams covered as general. So what's excluded are refunds and other correcting transactions, the issuance of debt or the sale of investments, agency or private trust transactions, and utilities and insurance trust. Next slide, please, Mike. So calculating the loss, what's important for municipalities in New Jersey is there is a predetermined growth rate of 4.1%. So on the next slide, which we'll get to in a moment, there are a lot of calculations assuming your municipality has a growth rate greater than that. But if you do not, which most municipalities do not, you can calculate the extent of the reduction in revenue at 4 points in time: December 31st, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. So those of you that attended the last webinar and asked about tax appeals, the fact that this has 4 points in time going out another 30 months or so from this point in time is beneficial for municipalities in terms of what we all know are the coming tax appeals. Next slide, please, Mike. So steps for calculating lost revenue: identify the revenue collected in the most recent full fiscal year. That's the base year. Estimate the growth rate of your municipality would have experienced using either 4.1% or the average annual revenue growth in the 3 full fiscal years. Identify the actual revenue collected over the past 12 months. Lost revenue is equal to the expected growth rate less actual. So if the actual exceeds the expected, the set figure is 0. Next slide, please. As Mike noted, this webinar and the slides will be available on the League's website. So if you do think that you have a growth greater than 4.1%, this outlines how you can calculate some of the loss. But given that I did not do that well in calculus or algebra, I'm going to ask Mike to skip ahead to the next slide, please. So prohibited uses. So specifically in the American Rescue Plan and the guidance, these items are prohibited from being used with your American Rescue Plan funds. Federal matching requirements. So you've applied for federal funding that has a state or municipal match to it. If you're prohibited from using the American Rescue Plan funds from fulfilling your municipal section of the federal matching. Premium pay. This is separate and apart from the first responders and essential employees. You can't utilize it for municipal employees that were not deemed essential and worked in the field or in the office. Pension funds, except for normal payroll. So you are permitted to utilize these funds for employees that are engaging in pandemic-related events, and you can utilize it to cover not only the payroll but the benefits as well. But you're forbidden from making a lump payment into your pension fund. Infrastructure, as we described earlier, not expressly listed in the legislation. Deposit in a rainy day fund financial reserves or outstanding debts. In conversations, we asked about could this money be deposited in an interest-bearing account, and we have not received word one way or the other. Obviously, we think that's fiscally prudent. Whether or not it could be viewed as a rainy day fund remains to be noted. I will also note legal settlements was also added as a prohibited use. So that's one additional. Next slide, please. So reporting requirements. So these reporting requirements are listed from and will be made to the U.S. Treasury, and the state may require additional reporting requirements, but what we're going to discuss here are just the reporting requirements from the U.S. Treasury demonstrated in their interim final rule. So for communities with a population over 50,000, financial records and supporting documents relating to the award must be retained for a period of 5 years after all funds have been expended, including those that demonstrate the award funds were used for eligible purposes. You'll be required to submit quarterly project and expenditure reports to the U.S. Treasury, including financial data, information on contracts and subawards over 50,000, types of projects funded, other information regarding the utilization of award funds. And the first interim report is due at the end of this summer, the end of next summer, October 31st, 2021, this summer, excuse me. The report's going to include some of the same general data as submitted by recipients that received CRF funding, with some modifications to expenditure categories and the addition of data elements related to specific eligible uses. The initial quarterly project and expenditure report will cover 2 calendar quarters from the date of award to September 30th, submitted to the U.S. Treasury by October 31st, 2020, and subsequent reports will cover 1 calendar quarter and must be submitted within 30 days. Municipalities that have a population above 250,000 will have to submit an annual recovery plan performance report. Next slide, please. For those communities with a population under 50,000, you'll be required to submit the project and expenditure report annually to the U.S. Treasury. The initial phase will cover project and expenditures from the date of award to September 31st and must be submitted by October 31st. Subsequent annual reports will be submitted on October 31st. Because this money is coming to the state and then distributed to the municipalities, we expect further guidance from state government and will report accordingly. It's likely to include some of the same parameters as I just described for the entitlement communities. Next slide, please, Mike. So on the state level, as I just noted, we expect that there will be additional reporting requirements. And I will note, these funds are permissive, but the state controller has already publicly announced that he's set up a COVID-19 oversight and compliance project to conduct reviews, audit state and local entities, review procurements, and investigate fraud, waste, and abuse of public funding. So it's something to be mindful of when you're planning your spending of these funds. Next slide, please. So there are a number of resources out there. We've put some of them in the chat box: the interim final rule, the frequently asked questions, allocation amounts for entitlement communities, and the application portal can all be found at the Treasury State and Local Fund Relief Plan website that is there. Next slide, please, Mike. We did not spend a lot of time on this webinar, but it is worth noting that there are several other funds within the American Rescue Plan that are available to help communities. The first is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. I actually just read this morning that the application process for this fund is scheduled to close on Monday. And I believe that's because they are close to threshold for the amount of money that has been authorized. We've spoken about this over the past 6 weeks or so. So if you have restaurants in your communities that would be eligible, you can look on the league's website and have them apply immediately over the weekend. Similar to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, there's the Shuttered Venues Operators Grant Program. This helps with community spaces, theaters, and whatnot. There is also a capital projects fund, which is $10 billion to fund to the states to carry out critical capital projects that directly enable work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options in response to the public health emergency. And each state has gotten an additional tranche of money. New Jersey's is $192 million to improve broadband services. Governor Murphy is actually making an announcement later this afternoon on the Capital Projects Fund and the Broadband Fund. So stay tuned for further information as the state looks to stand those programs up, please. Mike, next slide, please. And then lastly, and this is true not only of those communities receiving funds for the first time through the American Rescue Plan, but those that have received money through the CARES Act and the CRF. As Mike said, this is the first time that Congress has directly allocated monies to every municipality, county, and state in the nation. Federal officials are going to want to highlight success stories about how you've mitigated the pandemic and how you've helped your communities. And obviously the press are going to ask us how the money was spent. So please share your success stories with us. My email's at the end of this, and we will share those stories when we are asked. So I believe that is the, and so next slide, please. So this is being recorded and it will be posted next week, and check the league's website, njlm.org, for updates. And with that, I am happy to turn it back to Mike and take some questions.
Paul, we've received some questions from folks along the way. We've been asked, what is an entitlement town? If you can explain that a little bit further.
Sure. So an entitlement town, as defined by the federal government, is a community with a population over 50,000 residents.
And we received another question. Are municipalities allowed to send funds to their parking authorities? The person commented that theirs had and still has a significant reduction in revenue due to COVID testing sites being put in the parking lots across the city. So could they give a portion of their allocation to the parking authority?
So based on our reading of what Treasury has provided, yes, that would be a permissible use, because it's a municipal authority that that was harmed during the pandemic. I will note, in terms of the reporting requirements, if you transfer money to another, what the federal government calls a special purpose unit of government, or a nonprofit, or to another entity, the municipality is still responsible for those reporting requirements that we went over. So if a municipality decides to sub-allocate funds to help a homeless population, for example, they will have to require the entity that they've given those funds to report to the municipality in an available period of time so that the municipality can make their reporting requirements to the federal government.
And then in the same vein, another question came in. Has there been additional guidance regarding the transfer of funds from the municipality to a municipal utility authority for water sewer infrastructure projects?
So the federal guidance states that it is allowable to transfer to a special purpose unit of government or nonprofit. So, and our reading of that, so a municipal authority or a first responder would be a permitted use.
Okay. And in the same vein, can the monies be passed to the local volunteer emergency services, fire departments, first aids and such?
Presumably, yes.
Okay. And do autonomous municipal utility authorities get their own allocation, or do they have to request funds from the community serves, as many serve more than one community?
Special purpose units of government were not allocated money. Only the municipalities themselves will be allocated money. So they will have to come to an agreement with their serving communities to sub-allocate some of those funds.
Okay, and again, on utilities, one slide mentioned that utilities are not included. Does that mean if you have a water and or parking utility, you cannot use ARP funds to make up for the lost revenue for those utilities?
I believe that you can. Those are special purpose units of government, and you would be able to sub-allocate to them, provided that you can demonstrate that there was a negative economic impact from COVID.
Okay. Someone asked, could the funds be used to upgrade broadband, Wi-Fi, and internet wiring in our borough hall?
Presumably, yes.
Okay.
On one of the slides in the permitted uses, one of the permitted uses is cybersecurity, and obviously, given everything that has been made public in the past few years, an upgrade of broadband service would include certain cybersecurity enhancements and would presumably be permissible. And I should have said this, Lori, at the top. Much of what we're saying is based on the guidance that we've read. We expect that the information will be further refined, and and we will provide it once we have it. But the goal from the Congress was to be as permissible as possible in the usage of these funds within the broad categories that I outlined.
The next question, are we going to be handling this in the grant fund and then move as necessary to either revenues or allocated projects?
So that is a good question, and I presume that the state will provide some guidance on how best to account for the usage of these funds. Beyond that, I don't have more information.
Okay. Next question is, do you think technology and equipment upgrades for emergency communication centers 911 would be eligible?
I believe that that they would be. It's if you go back to I'm not asking Mike to go back to, but if in the framework to assess eligibility for projects, was there a harmful effect of COVID on the activity that this will address? Yes. Is there a connection to it? Yes. Does it assess for disproportionate impacts on distressed sectors or populations? Potentially. in the grand scheme of this, the framework is going to be your guide in whether or not you're able to utilize funds for this, along with the further guidance that the state provides.
Going back to the loss of revenue use, there's a question if they can use the money for the budgets through 2024.
So the funds must be expended through by the end of 2024. So they would be able to.
Another question is, should the funds be deposited into its own account? Can the account be an interest-bearing account?
We have asked that question at the federal level, but I also expect that the state will provide some guidance to that. It's a question of whether depositing it in an interest-bearing account would be considered, a rainy day, would be creating rainy day funds, and that is prohibited. So we'll need further guidance from both the federal government and the state on that.
Okay. The next question is there a provision to seek additional funding if the loss of revenues exceed the amount provided to the municipality?
From the federal government, this has not come up. Every county and the state has also received significant funds as well. And there is no prohibition on asking a government, a higher level government for additional American Rescue Plan funds. But obviously that has to work its way through the decision-making process of each of those governing bodies. But the allocations themselves were based on population and the a modified community development block grant process. So, I don't think that there's going to be a large either appeal or ask for more ability.
Okay. The next one is more a commentary, and they're saying it would be great through the professional associations if members would share these success stories with other towns, so we're not recreating the wheel and spending the funds. And we could put on our website in the chat box, put a link to our federal resource page where we too can also post the success stories we receive. The next question is, what constitutes an employee eligible for premium pay? For example, if the municipal building was closed to the public, but an employee was in the building working, are they eligible?
Yes, they are eligible, and there is broad latitude. And in fact, on the Treasury frequently asked questions in terms of premium pay, it states, essential workers at recipients may use this funding to provide premium pay directly or through grants to private employers to a broad range of essential workers who must be physically present at their jobs, including not only truck drivers, transit, sanitation, public health and safety, social services and human services staff at nursing homes, hospitals, and home care settings, workers at farms, food production facilities, grocery stores, and restaurants. And I read those out of order, so I believe I've covered all of them.
Okay. The next question is, do you think regulations will change regarding municipal utilities, parking, pool, etc.? I thought it said no utility funding in one of the slides.
I'll have to go back and check, but if a municipal utility authority for purposes of the federal government is a special purpose unit of government, you'd have the ability to sub-allocate to the authority. I expect that the state government will provide some further guidance on this, but, again, within broad parameters of to respond to the negative economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, including assistance to small businesses, nonprofits, areas impacted, industries impacted, such as tourism, travel, hospitality, and assistance to households. There's wide latitude in what is permissible, and I think that in many cases, because this is a brand new federal program that has never been that's in the process of being stood up for the first time, we're not going to have a long laundry list beyond what we've provided of, yes, this item that's very specific to your community is or is not permissible. I think in a lot of cases, what the municipality should do with their professionals and elected officials is use the broad parameters and the guidelines as to what you are doing fits within those categories. And I think if you do that, you're providing your best effort. And at this point, absent further guidance, that's the way to go.
The next question is, can labor, salary, and wages and fringe not reimbursed by CARES because county ran out of money, use these funds covered by this act? I'm sorry, there was a typo.
So I don't believe so, but I would have to think about it. Generally speaking, with the exception of the revenue loss and the premium pay, most of the other items are Treasury is viewing as a prospective basis. So if these are past expenses that weren't able to be reimbursed in the past from CARES Act, they may not be permissible, but there are going to be many complicated questions like this that we're not going to be able to give a definitive answer until we have further guidance.
And this one may be in the same vein, Paul. Is the use of funds for payroll and benefits for public health response allowed going forward, or can it be used for previously spent but otherwise unreimbursed expense?
So because health workers are specifically mentioned, I believe this would be permissible for premium pay, but I'm not certain that it would be that they can allocate it as if it's already been expended.
And comments being made on the issue with utilities is that some towns take revenue from the parking and/or sewer utilities and move it to the current fund. It's a little unclear if that's allowable using American Rescue Plan money.
Yeah, because that deals specifically with municipal government operations, I think that we're going to have to wait for the state to provide some clarity.
Another question has come in. Can the funds be used for scanning and digitizing of records?
I don't know. I would presume you could make the argument that you are enhancing cybersecurity in your municipality, and that is a permissible use. For everyone who's participating today, our suggestion to you is think about things that you want to spend money on that you don't otherwise have the ability to budget for. And then you've got a long leadway to spend this money. There are going to be a lot of guidance that's provided from the state and the federal government, and we're not going to be able to provide absolute specifics, but I think in the grand scheme of things, with 19,000 municipalities and 50 states and however many counties there are, there's going to be a lot of different thoughts of how to spend this money. And I don't think the government units at the federal and state level are going to spend a lot of time blessing your thoughts. I think that you're going to have to make an informed judgment that we're doing something that we believe is permissible through the parameters of the American Rescue Plan and be willing to defend it.
Another comment has come in. Residents have been inquiring about funding for school districts. Are Board of Education's provided funding directly from the state, or would they request directly to the municipality?
So the American Rescue Plan does have funding for school districts. Given the presentation that we just did, I have not spent much time looking at the other funding parameters of the American Rescue Plan, but I believe that those monies provided by the federal government end up with the school boards, and whether they go directly or through the state, I am not certain.
Okay. Isn't the date of expenses only March 3rd, 2021 going forward, the covered period?
I believe that is, with the exception of premium pay and lost revenue, that is correct.
Going back to the digitizing, would digitizing be qualified as allowing everyone to work remotely with efficiency?
I'm not certain.
Okay. We have about a minute to spare here, but we have gone through all the questions. So I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Sure, thank you, Lori, and thank you, Paul. And if anyone has any last minute questions, get them in the box now. And let me just begin to wrap it up very quickly. I want to compliment my team here, Paul and Lori. I know that the three of us have been on countless briefings with our partners with the National League of Cities, IGA calls from the White House as well. And much of the material you'll see here is material that we've gleaned from that interaction. So I want to compliment my staff, but I also want to thank the National League of Cities, our federal partner, who really took the lead on getting this together. They've been an advocate for us in Washington, just like the league is your eyes and ears here in Trenton. There are eyes and ears in Washington. So I want to thank them. And as I mentioned, this will not be the last briefing on this. This is an evolving issue, evolving project for us all. We are anticipating additional guidance coming from the Division of Local Government Services as this begins to unfurl, and we're going to continue to update you with the most timely of information. So with that, thank you all. I think one more
question. Yes, one more question.
All right, why don't we, are security cameras allowed? I think that might need some clarification as to what they mean by security cameras, because there's
Mike, they're asking if the security cameras can be used throughout the city and parks.
That might require getting back. That might.
Mike, that is correct. And we also, a question just came in about a deferred charge. Would that be eligible? We have sought clarity on communities that have raised taxes or bonded for the because of the pandemic is paying those expenses in eligible use. On its face, we don't see it anywhere, but we've asked the question, and similar to your deferred charge question, when we have it, we will let everyone know.
All right, and with that, as mentioned before, this session has been recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again. If there's any information you needed, it'll probably be posted on the league website by Monday. The slide deck will be made available to you as well. Keep an eye out for some additional briefings, maybe in a few weeks, as more information comes in and we have more to report to you. We have the questions that have been raised here, the ones that we have been able to answer. We're gonna dig in and see if we can get addressed in future briefings and future guidance. Once again, thank you to Paul, thank you to Lori, thank you all for joining us today. Be well, be safe, be healthy, and see you in Atlantic City in November. Thank you all.